US President Donald Trump has been fanning the flames of trade wars with his allies, his neighbors, and his enemies. Threatened with a 25% tariff on some imports over the weekend, Mexico appeared to concede to some of Trump's demands around border security on Monday, gaining a 30-day reprieve while the two sides hash out the details. And now Canada appears to have done the same, with Trump pausing the 25% tariff he'd threatened on some Canadian imports. That pause comes after Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau appeared to agree to a set of demands around halting the flow of fentanyl, which is an opioid, across the border into the US. Announcing the details on Monday night, Trudeau said this: "I just had a good call with President Trump. Canada is implementing our $1.3 billion border plan, reinforcing the border with new choppers, technology and personnel, enhanced coordination with our American partners, and increased resources to stop the flow of fentanyl. Nearly 10,000 frontline personnel are and will be working on protecting the border. In addition, Canada is making new commitments to appoint a fentanyl czar." sounds very New Labour. A czar, thousands of people are dying. Guess what? We're going to get a new person in charge who nobody voted for. "We will list cartels as terrorists, ensure 24/7 eyes on the border, launch a Canada-US joint strike force to combat organised crime, fentanyl and money laundering. I've also signed a new intelligence directive on organised crime and fentanyl, and we'll be backing it with $200 million. Proposed tariffs will be paused for at least 30 days while we work together." Now, that sounds like Trump won this round of the trade war. But in fact, Trudeau appears to have offered the exact same package that was broadly agreed with the incoming administration back in December. So Trump had won the election, but wasn't yet in the Oval Office. That border plan already contained that figure of $1.3 billion, the new helicopters and the personnel, as well as steps to tackle the flow of fentanyl. There are also signs that other countries hit by US tariffs have understood that this is less about global trade and more about giving Trump a win for his domestic audience. On Monday night, a 10% tariff on US imports from China came into effect, with Trump saying they were also partly in response to China not doing enough to stop fentanyl from reaching the US. Almost immediately, China hit back, announcing a package of tariffs on around 10% of Chinese imports from the US, as well as an investigation into American firm Google, Alphabet, for allegedly breaking anti-monopoly laws. We could do that. Sounds like a good idea. China also announced export controls on some of its own products, including tungsten and more than 24 other rare metal products and technologies. Now, China's counter tariffs, which will affect around $14 billion of US goods, are only set to come into force next week, which leaves some space and time for negotiations. Trump and Chinese Premier Xi Jinping are reportedly set to speak in the next few days. Helena, there's a lot of competing thinking on this. Some people said, well, this very high level of tariffs that Trump is imposing on Canada is the first step to annexation. Maybe it's just purely for domestic consumption, and actually he wants to rock the boat and he's broadly happy with things that were already agreed back in December. What's your read here? And why is Trump going so hard on tariffs with Canada? After the UK and Israel, this is one of the United States' closest allies. What explains all of this?
I mean, if you wanted to be able to pander to your domestic base by giving strongman vibes, right? In an era of geopolitical uncertainty, the strongman is somebody who comes out on top. We've seen this broadly across world politics since 1945 and previously to that too, where at the time when you feel like that there's something to lose, you go for somebody who looks strong at defending your country, or indeed by using their power to strong arm other countries into giving you what you want. Like, whilst Trump, I think, is an idiot for quite a lot of reasons, there are obviously plenty of people in his inner circle who they fully aware of the facts. There a huge level of tariffs being placed on Canadian exports to the United States would drastically harm their voting base, who basically supported Trump for lots of reasons that were to do with the economy and the inflationary pressures that were created, again, largely out of the pandemic from when Trump was previously last time president, but they blamed Biden for it. So they voted against the Democrats on economic concerns and cost of living crisis and inflationary pressures and economic headwinds against the previous administration. So they know that they can't just impose a bunch of further economic headwinds on their own population and come out of that democratically unscathed. But if they do pull this little trick you've seen here that has happened with Trudeau, I could if somebody told me this was entirely choreographed between the two parties, I would believe them, because this has been domestically popular for both the Trump administration and for Trudeau as well. For Trump, it makes him look like that he's getting this deal that he wouldn't otherwise have got if he wasn't trying to strong arm Canada. And for Justin Trudeau, who knows that these raw things are all coming down the pipeline anyway, and this is happening with Scheinbaum as well in Mexico too. They've said that they're going to do some policing on the southern border of the United States as well, the Mexico's northern border. And again, a lot of these plans were already things were in place. And it seems that Scheinbaum, Trudeau, and Trump have basically all realized that the American voting electorate aren't going to look deep enough into know what's happening here and just see, well, my strongman won the trade war here by getting concessions, and this shows that he's a competent and strong leader, without looking into the reality of the deal that had been cut here between the multiple different parties. And what's interesting to me is this is actually having an effect on the Canadian election, which is due this year. Like, if people are following Canadian politics pretty closely, the Liberal Party have been absolutely tanking in the polls, 20 points ahead style memes at this point, with regards to the Conservative Party, led by a kind of Trumpian figure, a kind of smarter Trumpian figure in Pierre Poilievre. But of course, it feels like to me, this is Trudeau's Falklands moment. You're drastically dropping in the polls, you're an unliked and unwanted administration, and suddenly something outside of your control happens that gets you to show you standing up for the interests of your country. And you can turn these, quite frankly, disastrous polling numbers around, at least to a certain extent. They're not 20-point deficits anymore on current polling numbers. And there is a one pollster called ECOS that's showing it in minority Liberal government territory, which is unthinkable given how tanking the Liberals were in the polls previously. And there's a potential for Mark Carney to be the new leader now that Trudeau has stepped down, that could potentially save the Liberals, in the extent that, first of all, it shows the Liberals have been strong in reacting to Trump's aggressive policies by essentially giving him what he wanted that he already had access to for his own domestic reasons, whilst looking like that you're saving saving Canadian consumers and exporters, and then replacing the unliked Trudeau with somebody who has links to the party who've done these things, but is also seen as more competent, and a new figure in the form of Mark Carney, who's widely perceived to be the favourite for the Liberal leadership. And of course, you're looking at Trump trying to strong arm you. Who's the closest to Trump in Canadian politics? Well, it's Poilievre. And you're just like, well, hang on a minute. If this guy is part of this political sphere, and people who he is politically close to in other countries are trying to strong arm us by trying to destroy our economy with tariffs and talk about annexation, that's really going to put you off the Canadian Conservatives. So yeah, it really does feel like a Falklands moment to me that could turn the face of the next Canadian election.
Yeah, I think that's really spot on. And it's not just Canada. You have people like Elon Musk going to bat now for the AfD in Germany with the tariffs that Trump is talking about on German cars and whatnot, and we'll talk about that more in a moment. That is designed to destroy the German automotive industry, designed to destroy it. Why on earth, if you're a German nationalist, be careful, by the way, with that, didn't work out in the 20th century, did it? If you were a German nationalist, why on earth would you back a political party which is supported by a man who wants to impose tariffs and destroy your domestic car manufacturing industry? You wouldn't. So I actually think the endorsements of Trump and people around Trump, like Musk, the endorsements of those guys from the Front National in France, or Rassemblement National as they're now called, or Maloney in Italy, or the AfD in Germany, I actually think that stuff's going to become net negative very quickly. Because, of course, America first means America first. Doesn't mean America and Britain and Germany and Spain and Italy first. It means America first. So bugger the rest of you. While Trump was quick to apply tariffs to imports from Canada, Mexico, and China, when it comes to other trading partners, he's issued threats instead. This was Trump on the US's trade relationship with the European Union.
We have massive deficits with the European Union, massive, like $350 billion, if you can believe it. They don't take our farm product. They don't take our cars. They don't take almost anything, but we take their cars. We have millions of cars coming in, BMW and Mercedes-Benz and Volkswagen and just so many different cars, and we don't do anything about that. And we don't charge them tariffs. They make it impossible to sell cars in the European Union. They make it very difficult, agricultural product. They actually don't take it. And they have a lot of excuses. Some of them are the pesticides and the different chemicals used. And Bobby Kennedy actually is looking at that very, very seriously, because maybe it's not necessary to use all of that. We want to be the healthiest country, and we're not. We spend more money on food than anybody else in terms of its creation, but we're not the healthiest country. So maybe there is something to the fact that we shouldn't be using so much chemical, and maybe that'll stop. But Bobby Kennedy is the one, because he is not a believer in all of the things we have done, and neither are the Europeans. So we'll see what happens. But they use it as an excuse not to buy our product. And I asked a couple of the leaders, I don't want to use names, but how many Chevrolets or Fords do you see in the middle of Munich? And the answer is none, because they don't take any cars. They don't take anything. So the European has abused the United States for years, and they can't do that.
Just liquid Trump, right? Why wouldn't the EU import our poisonous food? Maybe they've got a point, by the way, because they agree with RFK. Some of that stuff is probably quite bad news when it comes to human health. Why wouldn't the EU import our American cars? Because they're crap. They're not very good cars. There's a reason why the US imports a ton of European and Japanese cars. They're better cars. Wasn't always the way. They're better cars. They perform better, better fuel economy. They look better. Trump isn't wrong about the US's trade deficit with the EU, although the numbers he quoted there weren't entirely accurate. But there is a deficit. Here's the thing, it's not nearly as dramatic as he's making out. The value of EU exports of goods to the US are around 150 billion euros more than the value of goods imported from the States. So there's a big trade deficit when it comes to goods, but it's not the same for services, where the EU imports over 100 billion euros more than it exports to the US, making the actual deficit, which of course is both goods and services, around 50 billion euros in 2023. In short, the US gets German Volkswagens, the EU gets Netflix. Of course, not all exports to the US are spread equally across the EU, meaning a trade war would hit different European countries unevenly. Worst hit, predictably, would be Germany, already on the brink of recession, with exports to the US valued at nearly 160 billion euros, which is around a third of all European exports to the United States. Now, the EU negotiates trade deals as a bloc. That's the point of the European Commission. And its response to Trump's threat has been bullish. Here's President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen.
We also recognize potential challenges in the relationship with the United States, and we are ready for that. When targeted, unfairly or arbitrarily, the European Union will respond firmly. This weekend, we witnessed how steep tariffs were imposed on Canada and Mexico. Those tariffs raise business costs, they harm workers and consumers, they create unnecessary economic disruption and drive inflation. We do not see much good coming out of this.
Von der Leyen also hinted at the possible unintended consequences of US tariffs on EU goods, posting this online. On China, we will keep de-risking our economies, basically try and move production and supply chains outside of China. But there is room to engage and find agreements that could even expand our trade and investment ties. It can lead us to a fairer and more balanced relationship with this giant, and that can make sense for Europe. With Trump threatening tariffs on our neighbours, it's fair to wonder whether he'll be eyeing up UK trade for similar treatment, especially at a time when Prime Minister Keir Starmer is trying to improve the UK's trade relations with Europe. But if trade deficits are Trump's obsession, then the UK appears safe for now. That's because when it comes to goods, the UK and US export goods to each other of roughly the same value as they import. With services, it's a different story, with the UK enjoying a £70 billion service in the trade with the US. That's things like financial services, legal services, etc. But what Trump cares about is goods, not services, things, and his efforts to reindustrialize parts of the United States. Either way, Prime Minister Keir Starmer appears to be taking no chances, saying this on Monday night. In relation to the relationship between the UK and the US and the EU, I've always been clear that both are important to us. Now, that for me isn't new. I think that's always been the case and will be the case for many, many years to come. That's why in my discussions with President Trump, we've touched on issues of trade and on issues of security, both in relation to the trade we already do between our two countries, but also the security. God, this is like ChatGPT, isn't it? The defense and the intelligence partnership that we founded over many, many years. He means things like Five Eyes and NATO. Both of these relations are very important to us. We are not choosing between them, but that's historically been a position of the UK for many, many decades now. That's not entirely true because clearly the UK was a member of the European Union, our economic relations to Europe have been far stronger than they have been to the US. Helena, are you surprised by how deferential Starmer's been to Donald Trump, given he was the king of Remain, he was the arch lib ahead of 2020?
Well, I'm 0% surprised because, right, there are two acceptable ideological positions that you can take in British politics. And if you don't subscribe to both of these positions, you don't win. You don't get elected in British politics and you will be hounded out of politics for a very, very long time. Those two positions are whatever business wants, business gets. You can't talk about anything anti-business. You can be pro-worker, pro-business, but you can't be explicitly pro-worker because that's a position that opposes business, right? So that's the first position that you have to take if you want to be successful in British politics. The second acceptable opinion that you have to adhere to is that Atlanticism is correct. The special relationship must never be disrupted, and that is a founding principle of British party politics. And this has been part of the uni-party paradigm in politics for a very, very long time. Labour and Conservative, they both continually support this. There was a very short period from 2015 to 2019 where the special relationship was under threat because of Jeremy Corbyn being leader of the Labour Party. But we saw what happened to him and people, Sir Tricom and his little band of brothers to try and usurp the Labour Party leadership. They were working in the background. People from places like the Britain America Project were out there wondering what would happen to the special relationship if somebody who was opposed to American imperial dominance became the Prime Minister of the UK. And we saw what happened to these people. They don't last long. They don't last long in British politics. So I'm not surprised at all that these people are prioritizing the special relationship, given that, on even basic stuff that we should be talking about, like, I don't know, not selling weapons to someone who might be potentially committing genocide, or by indeed not having the balls to call for a ceasefire early on in Israel and Gaza. We, again, subcontracted our foreign policy out to the United States, so much so that Keir Starmer had to go to Munich to meet up with Anthony Blinken to essentially get a blessing to be able to have an official position that supports a ceasefire. We don't have independent foreign policy. And of course, as we've been seeing right now, we don't have an independent trade policy either. Our trade policy gets set by the United States. And if we deviate from that, they show us what for and they tell us what we will or won't do. And Keir Starmer and all the people in the International Trade Department, they have all essentially accepted this and are just letting Trump do whatever the hell he wants, just like they would have let Kamala Harris do whatever she wanted if she won as well, right? That is the position that you have to accept if you're going to be politically successful in UK politics. Now, this is where people would respond and say, but we have a force outside the uni party now that's being iconoclastic and insurgent politically, and that is Reform UK. And unfortunately, they are even more committed to Atlanticism and the special relationship even further than either of the other two parties are with regards to this particular issue. It's the fundamental kind of hypocrisy and contradiction in this kind of imperial nostalgia that undermines a lot of that underpins a lot of pro-Brexiteer arguments, which is that, well, previously we were sold out to the EU, we were part of the EU superstate, whereas we should be an independent, strong Britain branching out for ourselves. What has actually been the result of that? Becoming a vassal client state of the United States. And Richard Tice is essentially entirely sold into this. I was watching an interview with him on Times Radio, where he was essentially saying, it's ridiculous that Keir Starmer could even consider trying to prioritize the EU over the United States. And we should do whatever Trump wants because this is what's best for British people. Okay, so what you're admitting is that we don't have any position to actually be our own independent country. No sovereignty at all, just being a vassal state of the American empire, because we're not a strong country. We are a small country that's not that powerful anymore in the way that these nostalgists think that we should be on the world stage. And decoupling ourselves from one of the big three trade blocs, which at the moment is the United States, which is the EU, and which is BRICS, decoupling ourselves from one of the strongest ones of these that give us international recognition and makes us a rule taker rather than a rule maker, rather than a rule taker that we are from the United States when they set our policies for us, shows you just how completely facile these arguments are. Like, you can make an argument for like BRICS or whatever if you want to, but just on that Brexiteer argument of British sovereignty, newsflash, we have no sovereignty. We don't even have control over our own nuclear weapons, right? This is all at the behest of the United States empire too, to the point at which we are renegating on our adherence to an ICJ ruling over the Chagos Islands because Trump said so. Like, again, this isn't independent. This isn't being done with British people's interests at heart. It's being done to appease Atlanticists and to appease people who favor the special relationship over the interests of regular people in this country. And if you want to be able to extricate yourselves from this, you can't support the uniparty anymore. And as far as I can see, with regards to like being pro-EU, the Lib Dems are kind of taking that line, with an actual desire to see, civic nationalist politics that represents the interest of British people actually first. I mean, it's the SNP and the Green Party for different reasons, but they actually oppose this kind of special relationship politics that underpins the uniparty in this country.
Yeah, I'm very happy you talked about the uniparty consensus on this stuff. Isn't it incredible? For my entire life, we heard from the right, we need to leave the European Union. It's a European federal superstate they're trying to build over there, don't you know? And now, less than a year into a Labour government, we've left the European federal superstate, apparently, and now they want to become the 51st state of the United States, another federal superstate. And by the way, that's not a federal superstate in the making. It's been a federal superstate for the best part of a quarter of a millennium. I don't think that's what taking back control was meant to mean. And on Trident, very key to identify this, Helena, the Trident missiles have to be serviced in the US. We cannot service them here in the UK. So this idea that it's an independent nuclear deterrent, simply not true. You don't even need to talk about the deterrent bit. It's not independent. Because unless it's serviced by the US, Trident does not work. That's quite a big stick for somebody like Donald Trump, isn't it? Now, I've been saying that for years. And I was mocked by many, many people, serious, intelligent people in British politics and the media. And now you've got American nationalists on X saying, lol, the Brits, they'll do what we tell them because they don't even have a nuclear capability. If we don't want them to have one, they don't have one, lol. That's the reality of the situation. And the entire British public has been systematically lied to by the media and our political class to not disclose that information. They've been lied to. We will have to pay $100 billion plus to renew Trident. That is effectively a subsidy for American strategic defense. We are subsidizing a global system, which effectively is, like I say, an extension of US interests and US power. The British taxpayer is paying for that. But nobody in the media or political class will say that. Because, if you want to progress, the BBC, Sky News, etc., don't talk down the special relationship, even though that's exactly what we need to do if we care about people in this country. If you care about maximizing the interests of working people in this country, you absolutely need to call this stuff out. Nobody in the uni party is willing to do it.